in December on my Patreon page, patreon.com/jwilburn, I do one short story a day. So I did that for October 1st through the 31st, 31 stories, and I'm doing it right now with December. So those are already loaded up, ready to go. There's a couple writing and editing videos of the stories for a few of them. The one that's coming up, as of the time I'm recording this, it's coming up tomorrow, but basically it's coming up uh, December 4th, 2020 will be when it's available. 10 Christmases in Sleepy Hollow, 31 horrors for the holidays. So this is the fourth one on my 31 horrors uh, effort for December. Not all of them are horror stories, though. I was trying to do one a month. Now, I did write these stories over time, so some of them are older. A number of them were written just this year, and not all of them are long. This one is, and I'm not going to share all of it, but I'll share a couple chapters of it. I'm actually pretty proud of this one. It took me a long time to write all this. I write in the author's note here. My son read Sleepy Hollow for school, and one of his assignments was a 5 paragraph essay and writing a sequel. Revisiting the story with him made me want to try my hand. What were the possible explanations for what happened in Sleepy Hollow? I came up with 10, and then I took them as far as I could go. I can't share my 10 Sleepy Hollow sequels with my son, but I'm happy to share them with you. I hope you enjoy what I created. So this is 10 Christmases in Sleepy Hollow by Jay Wilburn. I'm going to read the prologue sort of thing, which is modeled after the prologues a bit in the regular Sleepy Hollow. Then chapter 1, which is a little long, and then chapter 2, which is shorter. I'll just read through those and share them. Again, some of them are violent. I don't think the first one. The first one there's some fighting in it, but I don't think it gets too bad. Some of the later ones are a little more splattery. Then there's sort of some that are just sort of funny or quirky and short. And then there's a few that dip into the supernatural. So looking at all the possible explanations for the Headless Horseman, I came up everything from fraud to he really is who he says he was to it's something even worse than we imagine. So we'll look at a few of these here. 10 Christmases in Sleepy Hollow by Jay Wilburn. Diedrich Knickerbocker was not a stable man even before his mind started to go in his later years. Yeah, I appreciate you dropping in, Brian, anytime. He fancied himself a businessman and a storyteller, two skills which normally marry well, but within Diedrich, these two masters joined an awkward bond that left everyone uncomfortable and whispering. He joined in a business meeting in New York uninvited, or would be found at a high Christmas party in Philadelphia where no one could quite figure out whose relative or friend he was. It might have been his fetish with old Dutch farmers, or his warm response he got once he had told his first Legend of Sleepy Hollow tale, but he couldn't quite read the room when he lost listeners. After everyone heard his Horseman of the Hollow once, he was desperate to recapture the warmth of his audiences. So he started weaving other tales from the seasons after the mysterious events in the Hollow, especially at Christmas parties, where his original tale wasn't appropriate. He tried these new tales. They began too tame in early tellings, and they ended far too profane in the later ramblings before he was finally locked away. These samplings are the best remembered by the witnesses that could be found in various stages of their literary evolution along the timeline of Diedrich's madness. Make what sense of them you will, but consider the source and pity the source, a man who had gray lines between his histories and his fantasies. All right, so number 1, The Legend of Brom Bones, A Degree of Rough Chivalry. Brom Bones won it all. Ichabod Crane was long missing and not found despite the town's half-hearted searches. Katrina Van Tassel, now Katrina Bones, was with child and started to show as Christmas snow piled heavy. And Brom was never going to have to work a day in his life again. He even paid some town scamp to move logs from the side of the hearth into the fire so he wouldn't have to get up. If the wretch didn't move fast enough for his liking, Brom would club him behind the ear. If he didn't like that, he could go back out in the cold, and one of his friends would take his place for half the wage. There was no shortage of boys, with no shortage of time on their hands, since no new schoolmaster had ventured into Sleepy Hollow since the incident. He was the richest man in town, living or dead, above ground or below it. Katrina's father, Balthus Van Tassel, had moved to the small cottage at the back of the property, as Brom ordered. He was not above clubbing an old man behind the ear, if fortune called for it. But boys and old men were not the only ones to bend to the will of Master Bones. There were plenty more daughters than sons through Sleepy Hollow that Christmas season. The impact of wars, savages, accidents, and preternatural horsemen had created a steep gender imbalance in town. Not one to leave a damsel in distress, Brom gladly paid the lonely daughters in town to visit whenever Katrina Bones was occupied. He would plow their fields somewhere quick and out of sight, and would even leave them coin to see them through the next plowing season. Brom whistled as he made his way up the snow-packed trail after seeing the lush fields of one of Katrina's sewing circle friends. He passed the bridge and laughed out loud with his breath billowing around his head. The borrowed saddle, Crane's hat, the smashed pumpkin had sent the town into a flurry of gossip he could have never anticipated. He still had the uniform and cape he had used for the disguise. Old Ichabod had lost control of his bowels before he lost Old Man Ripper's horse. Sometimes Brom took the costume out of the trunk where it was all hidden, and he just giggled over it like a schoolgirl. It all went as planned. He returned to his vast home to find the walk unshoveled. He showed his teeth and stalked up the path. "Boy!" he shouted into the house. But he didn't know their names and couldn't tell them apart. But one of them would pay. No one inside. The door to the barn hung open. The black stallion wandered outside in the snow. With clenched fists he made his way and prepared to subtract one more son from the population of Sleepy Hollow for all this negligence. No one inside the barn. Where were the boys, the cooking girl who sometimes would do for a plowing, or his wife? Had they all vanished same as the cowardly schoolmaster? Brom laughed despite his anger until the iron spade of a shovel struck him across the back of the skull. He bit down on his tongue as he was driven to his knees. Blood ran warm through his hair. He felt blackness try to wrap around his head and tighten on his neck, and he felt afraid for the first time. He fought to his feet and whirled around on his attacker. The figure backed out of the barn into the snow, and Brom charged. The uniform, the black cape, and no head, the decapitated figure stood next to the stallion Brom had used the night he drove off Crane, and the monster held the bloody coal shovel at his side. "Tell me who you are before you die." Brom trudged forward through the snow. "I know this trick better than any." Ichabod Crane's weird little head poked through the collar. "Don't think you know this one, Bones." He slapped the horse's rump with the shovel, and it bolted forward. A rope lifted out of the snow from a board braced in the loft window. The noose pulled taut on Brom's neck and lifted him into the air. His boots struck the barn, knocking snow loose from the tread. He clawed at his throat and then clawed at the barn behind him until he drew splinters under his nails. But he couldn't find purchase to free himself nor to lift pressure off his compressed throat. His eyes bulged, color and sound took on an otherworldly quality as he choked. He kicked his feet, causing himself to swing out and slam back into the wall, stealing his oxygen faster. Ichabod spoke the whole time, but Brom only attuned to parts of it. "I found myself a librarian in another town, but I never forgot you, Bones. I worked and I saved all these months to pay back Master Han Van Ripper for the lost horse, saddle, and unpaid rent, and I planned what to do with you. I saved enough to purchase the rope and other tools from Mr. Ripper to see this plan through. He was happy to help when he learned what you did. Said someone needed to put a stop to you before every baby born in Sleepy Hollow looked like you. I was happy to do my part too." Brom kicked out and slammed back again. He shifted down a few inches. He kicked again, and the board snapped, and Brom fell in a heap on the ground. Ichabod approached with the shovel above his head. Brom pulled slack into the noose with one hand. He grabbed up a section of fallen board with his other hand, and then broke it in half again over Ichabod's shoulder, sending the thin man to the ground. Brom reached for the dropped shovel to finish him, but the stallion bolted again. The rope pulled taut, and Brom dragged away through the snow. His shoulders struck the base of the well as he dragged by it, to a thrill of pain down through his skeleton. A moment later, he looped the rope over his chin, and the horse ran away without him. Brom rolled to a stop in the snow. He gasped for bitter cold air, and he tasted blood on it. Ichabod towered over him, a shadow against white sky, and brought the shovel down for a strike. Brom lifted his leg and deflected the blow with the sole of his shoe. He reached for the attacker, but was out of range. Ichabod swung again with mad abandon. Brom deflected with his boot again, but still couldn't reach. He dropped his foot and let Ichabod swing away. Brom rolled as the spade pierced the slush inches from his ear. He seized Ichabod's wrists and rolled over, pulling the schoolmaster off his feet into the wet ground cover with him. Brom grabbed Ichabod around his long throat and squeezed. Ichabod coughed under Brom, but the man felt all the strength leave his hands as he still gasped for air himself. Ichabod slipped out of his grasp and kicked Brom in the side of the head twice. Brom growled and charged, planting his shoulder into Ichabod's gut. As he lifted the skinny man off the ground, weak-ending pain erupted through the joint from where he had been hit while being dragged. He carried Ichabod backward toward the barn, but slammed the schoolmaster's back into the side of the well. Ice broke away, fell around his feet. Ichabod retched out all his air, and Brom fell to his knees with his energy spent. He wished he had picked up the coal shovel to open Crane's skull. Ichabod drew a knife with a long blade and an ivory handle and slashed it across Brom's cheek, opening it wide. He came back on the backswing for Brom's throat. Brom grabbed Ichabod's ankles and tilted him backward over the lip of the well. Crane dropped the knife but held on to the edge with his long arms. Brom pushed against Ichabod's face. Ichabod bit down on Brom's thumb all the way to the bone, and the world swooned. Brom slammed his fist into Ichabod's wrist until the bone snapped. Ichabod fell down the well, bouncing from side to side until he crashed through the ice at the bottom. The schoolmaster screamed, but Brom broke ice at the base of the well with his backside as he collapsed and sat with his back to the curved shape of the well. He drew deep breaths and clutched his thumb to his chest. His eyes lighted on the knife by his leg. Fancy, probably the sort of tool Hans Van Ripper would sell. Brom would have to return it personally. There doesn't need to be a quotation mark there. Ichabod still screamed. Brom rolled to his knees and lifted a loose stone. He rolled it over into the mouth of the well. It tumbled along the walls as it fell and struck something solid. Ichabod screamed, gagged, and cursed. Brom found a bigger stone and rolled it over. Ichabod reduced to whimpers, but he still lived. Brom found a smaller stone, but it had sharp edges. This time he stood and hurled it down the center of the dark hole. It did not make a sound until impact. It reminded Brom of the sound of the busted pumpkin by the bridge that dark night back in October. He smiled, but then toppled over in the snow unconscious. It would be after dark when he awoke, and he would lose one ear to frostbite and his thumb to gangrene. It would be a couple hours before he discovered his wife, her father, and the boys locked in the cellar under the big house. The missing ear and the scar across his face made his social visits more challenging, as girls did not like looking upon his face during his rough chivalry as much as they used to. All right, so that's Brom Bones' tale, and one possibility explaining the events of Sleepy Hollow. The second Christmas in Sleepy Hollow, we're going to look at the legend of Reverend Methuselah Stork, appetite for the marvelous and his powers of digesting it. Reverend Stork sat back in his chair, positioned just so by the fire in the small cottage. His footstool had to be put out wide from the seat because his legs were so long, and he could not bend his right knee with the splint. His arms extended for miles past the end of his sleeves for his robe, accenting the scabs and scars over his knuckles. His head was small and flat on top, but the real attention was his crooked nose that had broken during the business to the west. Falling from a horse in full flight could have ended far worse. Now the name Ichabod Crane was a ghost, and no more real than Methuselah Stork or any of a number of other inventions of a man born John Franklin and poor. He had played schoolmaster this last time for the fortune of the Van Tassel family, but Sleepy Hollow proved a hostile hunting ground. Here in Split River Valley, he was an evangelist which gave him excuse for traveling and long absences. The Reverend Stork character was not rich. His plain wife and 3 children were on top of each other in the cottage, but the tree was trimmed nice and the small room decorated and warm. It was a fine enough place to recover in safety, and being here at Christmas made his wife happy. "Father," his plain wife said, as her people were prone to call their husbands, "I'm so glad you are home, but I wish you would not attempt to preach to those godless savages. They know only violence. Mother," it put a sour taste in his mouth to call her that, "it's not what we will." "Yes, my lord, forgive me." She kissed his cheek and brought him more cider from the hearth. Yes, it was a fine enough place and time to recover from a failed scheme. In the town of Haven Home to the north, he was known as Dr. Eraster Raven. He knew little of the actual science of healing. He did know that a soul could be convinced to believe they were better, and sometimes that was good enough. When they failed, well, sometimes it is that person's time. Dr. Raven was very wealthy and could scratch together more by selling magic oils and healing elixirs based off the reputation of his name alone. After he healed and the snows melted, Reverend Stork would go on another mission. Dr. Raven would earn more money, and another name would be invented for another scheme in an isolated town out west. Mrs. Stork sat down at his feet and waited for her husband's next need or wish. That was how Plain Wise believed God wanted it. That was a fine place to spend a Christmas. And then chapter 3 will be the legend of Katrina Van Tassel, and that chapter is a little more violent.